Welcome, everybody, to the latest installment of the USINPAC Presidential Dialogue Series. We are joined by a senior advisor from the Rand Paul for President campaign, Mr. Elroy Saylor. Now, as you know, USINPAC is a bipartisan organization representing the 3 million Indian Americans throughout the United States and has been engaging with presidential campaigns, both Democrats and Republicans, since 2004. Just as we did in 2004, 2008, 2012, this year for the 2016 campaign, we're engaging with these campaigns to discuss issues important to the Indian American community and make sure that our voice is heard. Today's session is actually incredible timing with the Iowa caucuses and the New Hampshire primary coming up in just a matter of weeks. And you may be wondering why USINPAC has been so successful with this now being our fourth presidential dialogue series and discussions with campaigns. It's because campaigns recognize that Indian Americans, even though there are 3 million throughout the United States, we're actually strategically placed with having a good number of voters in very early and key caucus and primary states, as well as swing states. So, for example, and these numbers are from 2010, so they've surely increased. In Iowa, over 11,000 Indian American voters are there, including several that are politically active and have even run for and won statewide office. New Hampshire is close to 10,000, probably over that as well. And we also have elected officials in New Hampshire. South Carolina with 16,000, Nevada with over 11,000, and then Florida, the consummate swing state, is about 130,000. So it's been really nice that our numbers have increased in those states, and we've been able to build across progress from each of the prior campaigns. And we're excited to have Elroy here today. Elroy, would you want to talk a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself and your role in the campaign, and then take some questions from the community that have been sent in?
Sure, Minash and Sanjay, thank you all for having me this morning. It's always a blessing, and I'm grateful to join folks in our country to talk about some very important issues. One of the most important issues, a major election that's coming up here. Congratulations on USINPAC. Wow, 10 years. That's quite an accomplishment. Being from the minority community, African American community myself, it is so impressive to see other minority communities in the United States of America organizing politically. So let me first just say kudos and congratulations to your leadership and to all your members. That's very, very impressive. And you're right. The Asian American community, you all are about 2 to 3 million people in the United States of America, about 1% of the population. But you have a rich history, a rich culture there. You're represented in some very key cities: New Jersey, Ohio, New York, Detroit, Atlanta, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Philadelphia. You have some great associations: the Asian American Hotel Owners Associations, the Association of American Physicians of Indian Origin. So you have a rich history there of being politically and engaged civically and from an entrepreneur's perspective. I'm very, very, very fortunate. I could say I've got a deep connection to India, and it's through my daughter. My daughter is 16 years old, and she was just in India this summer for 4 weeks. She was in Agra, Jaipur, and New Delhi. And while I live vicariously through her, she texts me and visiting with her on Skype, and just watching her experiences there in your great country. Now, the bad thing about it, she said, "Daddy, I want to get married in India. I want to go to New Delhi, and that's where I'm going to have my wedding. So I got to figure out how to pay for that." But she wants to go to India and get married. But yeah, so she had a great time, and I had a chance to see through all of her relationships that she's built in the pictures, just how wonderful the country is there. Again, I'm Elroy Saylor, and I serve as a senior advisor to the Rand Paul campaign. I had the opportunity to meet Senator Paul about a year and a half ago. Senator Paul was at an African-American college called Howard University here in Washington, D.C., and he visited the college, and I didn't join him at that visit. Right after the visit, there were some media reports about the visit that it didn't go so well. Some people said he gave too much of a history lesson. Other folks congratulated him for showing up. But there was a lot of discussion in the African-American community about Senator Paul showing up. And my phones started ringing off the hook. Folks were saying, "Hey, Elroy, did you coordinate this? Did you and Congressman Watts or Michael Steele or some of the other black Republicans, did you all coordinate this visit for the senator?" I said no. I started calling around to some of my friends in the African American community and said, well, who helped the senator coordinate this trip to a black college? And no one knew. So a few days later, we went by to visit with the senator, myself and Congressman J.C. Watts, a Republican from Oklahoma, and we sat down with him and fellowshipped and dialogued with him for about an hour and a half. And I tell you, Manesh and Sanjay, after that meeting, I was sold. You know, here's a guy that talked about liberty for all, regardless of your skin color, red, black, white, red, yellow, or brown. He talked about opportunity for all. He talked about justice for all. He spoke from his heart. And I've been in Washington, D.C. for 20 years now. I worked for a governor back in Michigan. I worked for a United States senator, Senator Abraham from Michigan, and I worked for Congressman J.C. Watts on Capitol Hill. So I've spent pretty much 20 years of my adult life working in at the state, the federal level of policy, and I've spent the last 16 years running my own business. Got 2 John Deere dealerships with Congressman J.C. Watts down in Texas, and we have a consulting shop here in Washington, D.C., and I've been very, very blessed to have a wife that I met when I was 16 years old, and we have 2 lovely kids, Alamni DeJay Saylor and E. Claiborne Prescott Saylor. So I'm encouraged about the campaign. I'm glad to be a part of the campaign. I would like to spend more time, you know, listening to your or hearing from you some of the questions so I can respond more directly. So I believe the good Lord gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. So let me be quiet for a minute and listen to your questions. But thank you for having me again. I appreciate it.
Well, a pleasure, and thanks for joining us. Our first question is, so again, all of our questions came in from the Indian American community throughout the country. And our first question is from Sanjay Puri, who's actually the chairman of USINPAC and the founder of USINPAC over a decade ago. And he's based in Washington, D.C. Sanjay?
Pleasure to have you, and you have a great story of your engagement with Senator Paul. This is a question that comes in from Silicon Valley. There's a large Indian American community in Silicon Valley, and they really are interested in knowing how, what is the Senator Paul's vision for the new economy, for an economy, as you know, that is getting disrupted with technology, or just an overall view of Senator Paul's on the economy. It would be good to hear your perspective on that.
Well, thank you very much. That's a great question. Just today, the CBO announced that for fiscal year 2016-2017, that we are $544 billion in debt. That's $130 billion more than we expected. That makes us $18 trillion in debt here in the United States, which means that we've added about $10 trillion in new debt. Our labor force participation rate is at a 40-year low. Wage growth has remained stagnant. And real household income for average people, like the folks on this conference here, has decreased by 7%. We've got waste, fraud, and abuse that it's too much of it in our government. There's enough blame on both sides of the aisle. You know, a lot of folks talk about the right wing, and a lot of folks talk about the left wing. But the American people, that's the bird in the middle, and those are the people that our campaign likes to speak to. Sure, you've got the right wing and you've got the left wing, but again, there's the bird in the middle. And that bird in the middle, my father told me at a young age, he says, hey, you don't weaken the strong. You don't strengthen, pardon me. Father told me at an early age, he says, Elroy, a poor man has never created a job. That's one. He said, you don't weaken the strong by strengthening the weak. Or you don't weaken the strong. You don't strengthen the weak by weakening the strong. I got that backwards. And he told me that at an early age. And I learned that capital is a coward. And that's kind of the philosophy that the senator has approached our country. And what do I mean when we say capital is a coward? Capital will not go to unfriendly marketplaces, okay? If you've got a tax code that is repressive, if you have a tax code that stifles small businesses, if you have a tax code that does not allow for ingenuity and creativity, if you have rules and regulation that stifle growth and opportunity, capital will not flow to friendly markets. Capital, the free market system, will not open up their checkbooks. The banks will continue to raise interest rates, and you create an hodgepodge. You create an environment where it becomes very, very difficult for capital to flow. And without capital, in most minority communities, small businesses are our big businesses. So, the senator recognizes, what it's going to take to bring America back to its greatness. There was a time, back in the 70s and the 80s, in particular in the African American community, but I would suspect most minority communities, where we had small business growth. There was a time in the 50s and the 60s when many minorities were kind of shut out of the mainstream procurement process. So we had to depend on minorities across the board, had to depend on small businesses, whether it's in the agricultural sector, whether it's in the technology sector, the service sector. So small businesses are big business in America, in particular for the minority community. And when you talk about small businesses or large businesses, you talk about an America that has a 35 to 40% tax rate, and that's just stifling. It crushes small businesses and it crushes our ability to grow. So the senator has introduced a couple of things. One, he says, well, how do we deal with this problem of allowing capital to flow? How do we recognize that capital is a coward? What do we do since capital is afraid of unfriendly markets? Well, we have to create a friendly marketplace in America. And one of the things we're going to do is, God willing, Rand Paul becomes the next president of the United States, we're going to reduce that tax rate down to about 14.5%. That would be equally applied to personal income, wages, salaries, dividends, capital gains, rents, and interest. For a family that makes $50,000, or a family of four that makes $50,000 or less, they would not be taxed. For low-income working families, we would keep the earned income tax credit in place. Now that's a big thing. I own a small business. When I'm looking at paying 35 to 40% on a capital purchase of a computer, or office equipment, or some parts, that makes it. I have to make a determination. Am I going to buy that new piece of equipment, or am I going to put that money because I know I've got to pay my taxes, and on top of that, I've got to pay my accountant. But if you could free up the capital for small businesses, and I speak as a small businessman, and if you look at expensing, sometimes it's a very complicated system on depreciations, but if that tax could be levied on the front end at a 14% rate, that would allow me to do a lot more in my business. And I suspect most of your members that are business owners can appreciate and understand what I'm talking about. So, our tax plan is pretty comprehensive. We're excited about it. It's about a $2 trillion tax cut, and it's a thing that we think will bring America and the middle class, low-income people back into the mainstream of the workplace. Lastly, on that, I did want to mention again, when you talk about our fair and flat tax, we're also talking about that payroll tax. When that individual, if he works at Walmart, if he works at Deloitte and Touche, works at Ford Motor Company, or Juniper or Cisco, that payroll tax, that money is taken out before that family ever sees it. So, as the man of the household, or if you're married, you've got a wife and she works, if you've got a two-income tax household, that payroll tax, you'll never see a penny of that. So that's one thing that we want to do, is get rid of that payroll tax outright, so that these families can have a little bit more money in their pocket. We were, when I worked on Capitol Hill, we were talking about reducing taxes, and you had folks saying, oh, well, a $400 tax credit, taxes cut's not going to be enough, or $600 tax cut not going to be enough. And what we said is, hey, look, take $600 and go to Walmart. And you can fill up at Walmart or Costco's or Target, $600. That gets you a lot of diapers for some mother and father. That gets you a lot of books for kids. That gets you a lot of bills paid, a car note paid. That gets a lot of food on the table. So when we think about America, again, we try to approach it from a practical perspective, not at this 300,000-foot level where most Americans don't even understand what we're talking about. So those are just some things, and that's the senator's approach to our free market system as it relates to encouraging growth, encouraging job creation. Hope that's not too long of an answer.
No, that was great. That was, I think our members are really going to like that. That's very informative, and kind of shifting from a business question, we're going to go to Dolly Kapoor, who's actually on the board of directors for a Chamber of Commerce, an Indian Chamber of Commerce that's based in Nevada, another key early state. Dolly?
Hi, thanks Manish. Elroy, great meeting you and get to know about you and your lovely daughter, and I'm sure when you meet Sanjay, he will be able to hook you up with the right people in India to get your the marriage expense is low. So, having
Well,
said that,
I appreciate that. Thank you.
having said that, anyway, we meet a lot of physicians, and in fact, you had the opportunity to meet one of the best, Dr. Sampath Shivangi, you mentioned earlier. And when in Vegas, of course, there is a lot of physicians, and U.S. has about 10% of the physician population, Indian American physician population here. My question to you is, how would you explain Rand Paul's presidency affecting the healthcare industry?
Well, thank you, and you're too kind to offer some support for my daughter's wedding. Trust me, I'll take you all up on that when it comes time for her to take those vows, and we'll be right over there in India with her. Rand Paul, as you know, is a doctor, so he approaches the healthcare space from a very unique perspective. He understands it from the patient's perspective in terms of dealing directly with patients. He also understands it from the administrative perspective and just from the free market perspective. So we're pretty fortunate in that when our policy advisors and folks around the country visit with Rand Paul, Senator Paul, Dr. Rand Paul, and we have a healthcare debate, he's pretty smart. He's one of the smartest guys in the room, and not so much because he's reads up on healthcare and studies healthcare, but because he lives it and breathes it in his healthcare practice before he became a politician, a United States senator. He looks at kind of where the country is now as it relates to Obamacare. He voted against Obamacare. He's indicated one of his first acts, should he be blessed and fortunate to become president of the United States, would be to repeal that. But it's not enough just to say you're going to repeal Obamacare. You have a lot of Republicans saying, hey, get rid of Obamacare. But, sometimes you very rarely hear, well, what are you going to replace it with? And we think that's one of the challenges with what the American public is hearing when you hear Republicans saying they're going to repeal Obamacare, but not necessarily talking about the solutions. So when you start talking about the solutions, you're looking at the problems where you have a government that stands in between the patient and that doctor, and that government has gotten larger and larger, standing in the gap. Costs are being driven up. Competition is being decreased. Less freedoms are out there, and which also creates a less opportunity for innovation. So, the senator starts with that big picture, and then he says, well, hey, how do we just take some free market approaches and apply them to our American healthcare center, portable healthcare, deductibles in healthcare that's responsive to our patients, families, and doctors. So, we could spend an entire hour on the healthcare issue in America. It takes up about a third of the economy. But rest assured, as a doctor, someone who's been in the practice, he wants to bring a free market approach, a common sense approach to the healthcare system, and work with other doctors and bring those doctors and administrators to the table to really deal with the healthcare system in terms of how do we make it more applicable to not only patients but to business owners like myself, where I've got 7 or 8 employees, and I've got to look at how do I have to make choices between giving bonuses at the end of the year and paying healthcare costs throughout the year. So those are things that the senator understands, and the folks that are surrounding him understand.
That's great. I think we're going to turn from a couple of domestic issues that we had at first discussing to some foreign policy issues. Sanjay?
Sure. Elroy, as Manish said, we'll turn to some foreign policy issues, and a large part of our community has strong interest in looking at the future of U.S.-India relationship. The relationship has grown dramatically in the past 12, 14 years. Started with President Clinton visiting it, then you have had President Bush has visited, you had President Obama has made 2 trips. So it's been a bipartisan growth in the relationship. I wanted to see what would be Senator Paul's thoughts on the U.S.-India economic and political relationship, but also talk, if you could, from looking at it from partnership in the fight against terrorism or ISIS. India has been a great role model. It has the second largest Muslim population, but still continues a very peaceful coexistence with all of its population. So just your views on U.S.-India relationship, political, economic, Elroy.
Thank you. Well, U.S.-India relationships is a big world, but in the age of technology and greater resources and wealth, the world has become much smaller just in the last 30 years. And India, will continue to play a key and a dominant role in the history of the world. We kind of look at global foreign policy as it relates to India from four different perspectives. One is understanding India's own goals for the region. Two is really thinking through and adopting a strategic patience approach of patience, where the United States will work at a pace and a manner that is comfortable to India in a partnership with India. Three would be finding specific areas of which to focus attention on, such as technology transfers, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, looking at your Andaman and Nicobar Islands and the Minority policy. And then moving forward, how do you lay the foundation for future progress? So when you kind of look at India-U.S. relations from those particular 4 points, it's a very methodical approach. It's a streamlined approach, but it's also one that recognizes the brilliance, the creativity, the ingenuity, and the desires of the people of the country there in terms of working together in a partnership. The senator has always believed that America should not be the world's policeman, but however that America has a role in the country and in particular in that region there. So, those are 4 basic principles that we look at. You look here domestically in the United States, the U.S.-India Business Council, your 2 vice chairs over there, Mansur and Ranjan, I believe is the pronunciation of his last name. India has been a key ally in terms of America's war on the fight of terror in that region. You look at what's going on in the defense arena. One area that could be looked at would be procurement as it relates to bilateral trade. That's one area. I know your Minister of Defense on one of his last trips here, they talked about the growing system of the economy between the U.S. and India, and then really looking at kind of the defense area for businesses as it relates to job creation, mobilization, and other things of that nature. So, there would be a lot of opportunities to continue to build upon the successes that have been held over the last few administrations, but also to correct some of the areas that have not been so successful.
Thanks so much, Elroy. And as a follow-up to that, and just the world is so interconnected, and we see what's happening in the Middle East, and we see Saudi Arabia and Iran having tensions kind of increase in the past couple of weeks. And now there's been recent news that Pakistan might be sharing nuclear technology with Saudi Arabia. What are Senator Paul's views on Pakistan in particular?
The senator takes a peace through strength approach. It's kind of an old Reagan analogy as it relates to how we approach foreign policy. If you're going to fight a war, you're going to need allies, you're going to need partners. The senator recognizes that that region of the world has a long history. It's a complex history. It's not a history that you can look at with a very small lens. You have to look at it comprehensively. Pakistan has a role in that region. And, the senator's approach clearly, again, being a doctor, I think he resorts back to kind of his foundation as it relates to foreign policy. And when a patient goes into a hospital, the doctor's job is, he doesn't immediately start operating on that patient, nor does he immediately start prescribing medicines or prescriptions. You want that type of doctor that's going to sit down with you and take a few minutes and get an understanding of, first of all, what are your problems? And then second of all, well, what led to these problems? So, you think of a doctor who's sitting in the White House as President of the United States and takes that approach to foreign policy with our allies and with folks that are not allies. Again, it's a scenario where you don't shoot and then aim second. It's a scenario where you aim first and then shoot second. And when I say aim and shoot, I don't only mean from a military perspective. It's a policy perspective. It's an economic perspective. It's a humanitarian perspective.
Thank you. I'm moving on to an economic question. What are your thoughts, and this comes from a pharmaceutical and financial executive that's a member of USINPAC, and he had asked, what are your thoughts on promoting pharmaceutical innovation and research and development within the United States so that, among other benefits, pharmaceutical companies may stay away from taking advantage of tax inversion, similar types of policies where a company shifts its headquarters to a foreign country that may have more favorable corporate tax structure than the U.S., and not just specific to the pharmaceutical industry, but just generally.
Sure. The senator, I accompanied the senator to speak to the Business Roundtable back in June of or midsummer of last year. And as you are maybe familiar, the Business Roundtable was headed up by Governor John Engler, which happens to be my old boss. So it was good to go visit and see the old governor there. I spent 12 years working with him. He's now the chairman of the Business Roundtable. And the senator spoke to that group of CEOs. That's a makeup of, I guess, a myriad of your Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 CEOs. And that's a great question, because that was a question there from many of the pharmaceutical executives that were in the room, as well as folks in the tech sector, the agricultural sector, and so on. But one of the first things the senator talked about in that speech to the Business Roundtable in the room of CEOs was creating that, looking at the tax rate. Again, as I spoke earlier in my first question, we've got one of the highest tax rates on the planet here. So reducing that tax rate to allow businesses to keep a little bit more of what they earn so that they can reinvest that. Hopefully you have business leaders that do the right thing and give away some nice bonuses at the end of the year, and not just to the C-level persons, but the folks that are working out there on the front lines of these companies. One of the second things the senator talked about was creating a scenario where the companies that are already overseas would create some kind of incentive, some type of policy where these companies can bring back their monies home. A lot of companies are leaving the United States shores and heading overseas because of our repressive and regressive tax system, and they're already there. So we want to maybe try to get some of those companies back immediately in the first X number of days, and you do that by doing some tweaks to the tax structure and allowing them to bring that money home with less consequences there. Thirdly is innovation and technology. I was with the senator, and we were in Highland Park, Michigan, which is a very small community, very low income, poverty community. Unemployment was probably 23, maybe higher than that percent. It's predominantly African American community. And we drove by a school that was closed down. It was the high school there. And the senator asked the mayor, who was a Democrat mayor, I may add. So the senator is walking through the streets of Highland Park with a Democrat mayor. And as you all know, Highland Park was home to Ford Motor Companies, where the first Model T Ford was rolled off. So you think of that rich history in terms of a city that was the envy of the world, that produced the first Model T Ford that's now got unemployment in double digits. You think about those companies that have left, as you mentioned specifically the pharmaceutical companies, but I'm talking in general here now. And the senator talked about the technology issue, whether it's for an automotive industry or whether it's for the pharmaceutical industry, the agriculture industry. We have a lot of bright minds in this country, a lot of brilliant minds out in the West Coast. And he talked about why couldn't we have an educational system where if you've got a great teacher in California, or you have a great person who works at a Pfizer or Merck, and you have some student who's interested in going into the pharmaceutical industry, why couldn't we create, with the technology that we have in this country, the ability for students to learn online? Why do we have to close down schools because of infrastructure challenges when you can do a lot of this stuff virtual? I mean, we're having a conference call right now virtual, and I'm sitting here in my home office. So technology should be a key as we begin to think through America sustaining and continuing to sustain its greatness.
Great. Actually, following up on your education comments, Indian Americans, as you know, place a strong emphasis on education. And could you discuss immigration policies under a Rand Paul presidency? And it's very interesting you commented about the technological aspect.
Did you say immigration or education?
Education.
Oh, education. So, education is interesting. I've got to do some radio here later today, and I wanted to I don't know if your folks could see this, but here's a chart that I was looking at, and it was pretty fascinating here. So you see the yellow dots there, and then you see the blue dots. The yellow dots stop at about $10,000, and those are for all of the states in the country. And then you see all the blue dots there. The blue dots go out to about $60,000. And what that chart showed that was pretty interesting is that all of our states spend per student no more than about $12,000 to $15,000 to educate a child. But every one of these states spends between $12,000 and up to $60,000 to educate a child. So when you look at our education system in America, we have a lot of work to do. We are in the top 7 of spending per pupil in the country. And this is America, the greatest country, in my opinion, on the face of the planet. We have an educational system that's being run out of Washington. And when you have an education system that's being run out of Washington and it's not connected as the way it should be to parents, to local teachers, to local administrators on the ground, you tend to find this gap in education. So the senator's approach to education is to really look at a couple of areas. One is, how do we bring more technology into the educational arena to do things like virtual schools, to make sure we've got the best teacher if he or she resides in Louisiana, and you have failing districts in Detroit and failing districts in Chicago, or whether they're black, white, red, yellow, or brown, failing poor white districts in Kentucky, Appalachian Mountains. Why shouldn't we have a scenario with the technology and the smart folks that we have in this country to design a system where kids can get online and learn from the best teacher? We should not have a scenario where the kids are not learning from the best teachers in our country. One. Two, if a child like myself, who grew up in inner city Detroit, low to middle income part of the city, I was fortunate. By the time I got to high school, my father worked at Ford Motor Company, so he had saved up enough money, worked enough triple overtime working at Ford Motor Company there at the River Rouge plant to put me in a private school. But I have a pretty big family, and many of my cousins, they did not have the opportunity to have the resources to go to a private or a Catholic school, so they were kind of stuck in a failing school district based off of where they live. And that, the senator feels is not fair to children in America based off of the economic situation of your family, that you're forced to be stuck in a failing school district. So the senator is a big supporter of choice and vouchers and charters, and giving parents from low-income neighborhoods the opportunity to pick and choose and send their child to the best school. And then you hear an argument from folks that say, well, if you take the best students out of a school and you take money away from the school system is going to fail. We find that quite ironic, because if you look at the university level, a college student can take a Pell Grant and go to any school in the country. And our university system has not failed in America. You look at the healthcare system. You can take your Medicaid and your Medicare, and you can pretty much go to a lot of different hospitals. And our medical healthcare system has not failed in the country because we have choice. So the senator is a really big proponent of choice for K through 12. 2, and then 3. As the senator has traveled around the country to areas like Detroit, which has a high minority population of Arab Americans, a high minority population of Indian Americans, one of the highest in the country, African Americans, of course. He's had an opportunity to see real people. And yes, we need to fix our education system. Yes, we need to have less reliance on Washington, D.C., but there also is the component of the parents. You have single moms who are trying to figure out, how do I go to work? How do I get my kids ready to go to school? So you have an infrastructure issue. You have a public bus system in many of these cities that's failing, and they're not safe. So you have a crime issue in a lot of these cities. So when we talk about education, the thing that most impressive to me, and I think most Americans, as they hear the senator talk more, as when he talks about education, he looks at it comprehensively from the child's home to the road that the child has to travel to get to school, to what happens to while the child is in school, and then not only while the child is in school, then what are the opportunities after college. Again, my father didn't go on to a university. He went to a trade school or a vocational school, and he was able to raise a family and make good money working at Ford Motor Company in a blue-collar job. Those opportunities existed many years ago, so we need to, the center wants to get back to looking at various models so that you don't have a one-size-fits-all approach to education. And again, it starts in the home, looking at policies there that impact, such as our welfare policies, our welfare reform policies, our criminal justice reform policies. So when you talk about in particular low-income people and minority people and poor white folks, and you look at our criminal justice system, you have a criminal justice system where a nonviolent father or mother has made a bad choice. I don't call it a mistake. They made a choice. They should pay their time. They should pay their dues. But we have a system where we're spending upwards of $60,000 to take care of an inmate, maybe someone who's committed a nonviolent crime, and we're spending $12,000 for that kid's child. So this is what we have in America, friends. We have a system right now when you talk about education. If you look at it comprehensively, you may have a father or mother who made a bad choice. They end up going to jail. Now your tax dollars are going to spend upwards of $60,000 to what we call to rehabilitate that person in prison. Now we're only spending $12,000 for that child who's at home with maybe no mother or a father. So you're creating a huge scenario right there for someone who should not be in jail for X number of years, depending on the crime. So you start there with the home. Now you get to a scenario where that mother or father comes home, they're trying to re-enter back into the marketplace, and because of these check-the-box issues and ex-offenders can't vote, ex-offenders can't do certain things in certain areas with their children, you created a dynamic in the home structure even before the child gets to school where it's challenging. So we've got to address our criminal justice system when we talk about education. Secondly, then I've already gone through the education issue and the spending and the choice and the need for technological improvements and innovation there. That's the second thing. And then the third thing is then you layer on our tax structure and our tax system that the senator talked about as it relates to reducing the payroll tax, reducing the corporate tax, reducing a lot of these taxes and creating a fair and tax system so that if you do go to school, you end up going to college or you end up going to a trade school, you end up going to a white-collar job or a blue-collar job, that you can keep a little bit more of that money in your pocket so that that cycle can start over. So one of the things that I like, and I think and we hope that as Americans get to hear the senator more talk about education, I think one of the things that will separate the senator from many of the other folks that are running is he talks about education comprehensively.
I think so. Well, yeah, that's really helpful. And actually, our next question is from Vali Kapoor from Vegas, who has a question about immigration. Dolly? What she was going to ask is that Indian Americans are an immigrant community, and we want you to discuss immigration policies under a Rand Paul presidency.
So America is strong because it's a melting pot. Our strength is in our diversity. When we travel around the country, one of the things that we like to talk about, and one of the things that in particular, you hear on the campaign from various surrogates saying is, if we're in a room, we'll ask the folks to stand up and say, well, raise your hand, Manesh, if you decided that you were going to be Indian American. I'll say, well, J.C. Watts, raise your hand if you decided that you were going to be an African American. Rand Paul, raise your hand if you decided that you were going to be a white American. No one can raise their hand. So, again, when you look at immigration, you start with that, God created diversity. And, our opinion, if diversity is good enough for God, then by golly, it should be good enough for America and the President of the United States to enjoy and celebrate and recognize that our diversity is what makes us strong. Our diversity is a gift from God, because not one of us, not 330 plus million Americans, not one of us determined the origin of our race, or the destination of our race. So that's, again, a gift from God. Now, when you talk about America and you talk about diversity, we are one of the things that separates us from many nations. One of the things that has allowed us to grow and become strong and a caring country is we have a government, and you have to have borders. You have to have territories. That's just a part of government. The senator has been made it very clear he does not support amnesty for the illegal immigrants who are here in the United States. However, he recognizes that the country is enriched through our diversity. So the senator would like to see an approach. He kind of looks at it as trust but verify, and that would be an amendment which would require Congress to first enforce our border security and create a blueprint for that, and not rely on the bureaucrats and some of the folks who have not been elected to determine that. The senator thinks that should be determined by Congress rather than a bureaucracy there. Secondly, is to then strengthen our national security with the appropriate resources, and then making sure that you have the appropriate offsets in other places of the country so that you can continue to reduce the debt while at the same time maintaining border security. And then thirdly, on the immigration process, the senator is supportive of looking at a scenario where we understand who's coming into the country first before we have a wholesale entry into the country. So putting some pressure on a trust but verify approach.
Well, thank you. And actually, we have, I think we've had very specific questions about different issues, and I want to give you a chance to talk in more general terms. Dolly, would you like to ask the next question?
Sure. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we sure can.
Okay, great. Okay. So I wanted to ask you, thanks for explaining education policy and immigrant policy. How would you differentiate Rand Paul presidency with any of the other presidential candidates?
That's a very good question, Dolly, and thank you for asking that. I like to start with the individual. I've spent the last year and a half, almost 2 years now, with Rand Paul traveling the country, and I don't take lightly the relationship that I've built with him. I've given up time from my daughter and my son. I've given up time from my business to travel around the country with him to work on the campaign, because I've seen a man, whether he's in inner city Detroit in a room of all African Americans, I've seen a man, whether he's talking to the Indian American Physicians Association, or whether he's talking to an all-white business group or a Tea Party group, or Native American or Arab American group. I've seen a man who's been very consistent in his positions. So that's one. Two, I've been around this town long enough, and I've seen enough candidates and politicians year after year, election cycle after election cycle, running for office. And one thing I've noticed is, being a former staffer and working on several campaigns, you can hire really, really smart people to tell you what to say and give you really good policy. You can hire really, really smart people to create creative ads and give you great sound bites. You can hire really, really, really smart people in America to put on the right, to have you wear the right things. But one thing I've noticed in my 20-something years of being in the political process here is that you cannot hire and you cannot buy goodness, and you cannot buy common sense. The senator has a good heart. He's a good man, and he approaches many of the problems in America from a common sense approach. As I listen to many of the candidates, look, I think all of the candidates care about America. I think all of the candidates want America to be a better place. But again, one of the things that has attracted me to Senator Rand Paul is the goodness that I've come to see in his heart. So I think, and I can't speak to the goodness in anyone else's heart, but I can speak to the goodness that I've seen in his heart. I can speak to the consistency when he's in inner city Detroit, or when he's in a room with Indian Americans, or when he's in a room with Tea Party business leaders. I can speak to a consistency. He goes to Iowa and he talks about criminal justice reform. He talks about criminal justice reform in Detroit. He goes to Ferguson and he talks about reducing the corporate tax rate. And he goes to New Hampshire and he talks about reducing the corporate tax rate. So again, I think one of the things that I can only speak to his strength versus the differences with everyone else. Those are some of the things that I hope the American people begin to see as a strong suit of Senator Rand Paul.
Thanks, all right. I think we have a final question. We're going to ask if you can, after we go off live, if we can have you for another maybe minute or two right after that. If that's
Sure,
okay?
no problem. No
so
problem.
Actually, the final question has actually been, we've been getting responses during this of people wanting to know more information about the campaign, how they can find more information both about his policy issues and how to get involved in the campaign as well. Because one thing that USINPAC has been able to do for several of the past election cycles is to help young people get active in campaigns, volunteering for them, helping them in any way they can. So how would they go about doing that with the Rand Paul campaign?
Well, that's a really great question, and I so appreciate that question there. We've got an exciting campaign. Let me answer that question, but I want to just take 2 steps back first and talk about the campaign where we are for a second. So in 2008, 2012, we had a polling scenario. I was just looking at some of these poll numbers here. Let me see if I can pull them up. Well, I can't find them here, but let me just talk in general. You had a scenario in the last election where Senator Sam Torm was polling about 1 or 3% in the election at this time. Michelle Bachmann, Herman Cain, Newt Gingrich, a lot of these guys were in the double digits. And about a week or 2 weeks or a month out of Iowa, we saw that Senator Sam Torm, because of a great ground game, end up winning Iowa in that last election cycle there. Now, he didn't go on to win the nomination, but what we've learned from that scenario is that you've got to have a great ground game. In the last 2 elections, Senator Rand Paul's father took 3rd place in both elections. And so we will start with a very good base of some of the Rand Paul supporters. We have built up one of the most exciting ground games in New Hampshire and Iowa that encompasses new voters to the party, folks who have not caucused before. One thing I will want to add as it relates to just organizational structure, the last 2 presidential elections in Iowa were held in January, which meant that there were about 119,000 people that voted, 100,000 plus people that voted in both election cycles, 2008, 2012. But one of the big distinguishing factors was that the college students, the universities, were not in session in January, so you had over 100,000 students who couldn't vote. And when we look at the polling numbers, a lot of the students are not being considered in these polls. We've built up one of the most dominant youth movements in Iowa, so we're pretty pleased about that youth movement, and we think we'll surprise some people with the new voters that we've recruited and attracted to the party, with the young people's movement that we've built up there, with the Ron Paul former supporters that supported his father, that compelled his father to 3rd place. So we're excited about our chances there in Iowa and New Hampshire. With that said, we could use all the help we can get. I could be reached at eSailor at randpaul2016.com. Again, that's eSailor at randpaul2016.com. So if anyone wants to email me, I can put you in touch. Even if you can't be in Iowa over the next 2 weeks, we have a phone from home program where you can sit in the comfort of your home and your lazy boy and watch your favorite team play this weekend or next weekend, and participate by calling in. They have opportunities for folks to go to Iowa or New Hampshire and work on the ground, where the campaign is coordinating that, so there's opportunities there. And then there are other opportunities if you want to support the campaign. Unlike Donald Trump, the senator is not a billionaire, so we do need resources, and we are asking for support and help from folks out there, whether it's a $5 donation or a $20 donation. Every bit helps to get your message out and to get the students and get folks there to Iowa. So, and then you can also go to Rand Paul, the website, just Rand Paul, www.randpaul.com, and you can go on the website and look at activities. But again, if there's something very particular, I would love to work with USINPAC over the next 2 weeks or over the duration of the campaign. It may be easier, Manesh, to have folks contact you directly, and then that way we can coordinate it. So, campaigns are moving 100 miles a minute. I would hate for someone to make a call and not get called back, or someone to email and have your email drop. So maybe what I would recommend is that we create some sort of flowing system and an ability, not where USInpac is endorsing Rand Paul campaign, because you guys, I don't believe you guys can endorse, but we wouldn't mind working with you to say, well, hey, if you've got folks in your organization that want to support Paul, we can connect them directly. So those are two ways. I either have them contact you, send their information to you, and you forward it on to me to make sure we get it, or they can email me directly.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much. I think, so again, if we can have you hang on after we go off live, but we'll go to Sanjay for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Manish, and thank you. That was very, very good. Really appreciate the dialogue. It's a great idea to hear about some of the the vision for Senator Paul in terms of foreign relations, in terms of the economy, in terms of healthcare, in terms of his views of youth, prison reform, all those things which are going to be really relevant because we are sitting at a time where the United States, as you said, it's the greatest nation in the world, and I completely believe in that. But the question is, are we going to leave it as great for the next generation, for our children or their children ahead? And I think that's the things that you are talking about. So really appreciate it, and on behalf of the 3 million Indian Americans who are dialing in or listening or have interest, at least some of them who are interested, this is a good message for them to take back. Thanks, Manish.
And are we off live now?